Hello,
Hi there.
and welcome to our movie marathon.
Our movie talks.
Yes.
Next horror franchise is the Candyman.
Candyman franchise. Say his name 5 times.
We already said it like twice. Candyman.
Yeah, Candyman.
Candyman.
But we're not in front of a mirror.
Damn. Oh, whatever.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's get into this. This is 1992. Tony Todd, just outstanding. First of all, he's in the first. Actually, he's not technically all the movies, but he's like the primary antagonist in the first 3 films.
Yes.
So he follows this woman named Helen.
Helen Lyle.
Yes, Helen Lyle, who's a grad student, and she's studying the history of Cabrini Green.
Cabrini Green. Yeah,
Green.
Cabrini Green.
Cabrini.
In Chicago.
Yeah.
And she comes across Candyman, like the Candyman legend or story, because it started out in his death, I think, ended. It's very confusing, the timeline, how he ended up in Cabrini Green back in the day, that his death was there or something like that.
Yes.
Yeah.
So he died, and he fell in love with this woman he was painting, and then her father found out, did not like it, and decided to have him executed. So he had tons of people mob after him, and then they cut off his right hand, covered his nude body in honey, and let him get stung by a billion bees.
Yes.
Or not really a billion, but a lot of bees. Like a
whole mess of bees. A whole flock.
Yeah, a whole flock of angry bees.
A whole flock.
What are they called? A honeycomb?
Swarm.
A swarm, yes.
There you go, a swarm. But yeah, she ends up following this Candyman story, and of course she says his name 5 times in a mirror with her friend, I think it is. And stuff ensues from there. She passes out, and Candyman visits her. He's like, "Be my victim, Helen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Also, she's kind of like his reincarnated lover.
Yeah.
And so she basically starts to try to figure out his history or whatever. And when she's looking for him, she finally, after getting attacked by a false Candyman, gets visited by Tony Todd in a parking garage, who basically said, "You were looking for me," and he's very poetic, and his scenes, or his dialogue is haunting and also beautiful.
Yeah.
But also slightly eerie and
creepy,
and also just really cool.
Yeah. Gives you goosebumps.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, she wakes up in a pool of blood.
Yeah.
And there's a dead dog next to her with the head chopped off.
Yep.
And there's a lady played by, speaking of which, Helen Lyle's played by the fabulous Virginia Madsen.
Yeah.
And then the next woman I'm going to talk about, the lady in the apartment with her as she wakes up, is played by Vanessa Williams.
Yeah.
Not the singer, the actress. But she's screaming, her baby's missing.
And she thinks that
Helen did it.
Took the baby.
Took the baby and killed the dog. And
maybe
Helen's got a meat cleaver in her hand because she's dumb and picks up a fucking meat cleaver.
I think she kind of just doesn't know what's going on and thinks she's kind of freaked out.
Well, she freaked out and picked up the wrong weapon.
I don't know. Maybe. I don't know. But
still. So anyways, the cops show up and she gets thrown in jail. Like, it's a very haunting experience. Like, a very traumatic experience.
She goes to jail, and she's like, I didn't kill the baby. I didn't take the baby, whatever.
Of just watching her go through customs.
Yeah, they go through the customs of, like, of being booked and jailed.
Yeah.
And
it's
so...
very scarring.
The detectives start accusing her and going, like, how you're disgusting and this and that. And she's like, I didn't do it, blah, blah, blah. And they're like, well, who did? And when she says Candyman, they're like, okay, yeah, she's crazy. So I think she goes home, and then they decide finally to release her. She goes back home to her husband, who's like, because when she's in prison, she gets allowed one phone call. So she's like, they basically tell her everything initially when she's in the prison. She's like, what are you gonna do, basically? And she's like, well, I'm gonna make a phone call. And she calls her husband, and her husband doesn't answer. And then she asks what time it is. It's like 10:30 or whatever. She goes back home after they released her, after everything happened. And she's like, where were you? She goes to her husband. She's like, where were you? And he's like, oh, I thought you were with your friend. And I was, I think, working late or whatever.
He was sleeping.
Well, that's right. He was sleeping.
He was passed out.
Yeah. And,
yeah, right.
Yeah, so she goes, whatever. So she's telling her best friend about everything, I think. Right?
Well, yeah, she has another episode.
Yeah.
In the apartment with Tony Todd, Candyman.
Yeah.
And he's like, be my victim.
Yes.
And again, and her best friend shows up, and he.
Oh yeah, he kills her,
hooks her. And of course she wakes up and she finds her friend dead,
and
she's in handcuffs.
And well, they wake her up. And then she's so sad about her friend dead, and they kind of just think, they're like, well, who else did it? So everyone thinks she did it, and whatever, and even her husband turns against her.
Yeah.
And she ends up going to a facility,
a psych ward.
Yes, a mental facility, and she's when she's there. They kind of ask her who did it. They keep on thinking she's crazy because she keeps saying Candyman. And then she's in the hospital, and then she
goes to the doctor's office.
She goes to the doctor's office. They put her in a bed.
Like restraints.
Yes, and she ends up having a dream where she ends up having an experience where she sees him again, and they play back footage after she tells them what happened. She's like, because she's screaming, he's in here, he's gonna get me. Then they look back at the footage, and there's no one above her. Like, there's no one levitating above her when they play back the footage. So she gets questioned by, I think, like the head of the facility.
Yeah.
And she's talking to him, and then he's like, well, then prove it. And so she there's a mirror next to the desk or whatever, and she says his name. And then you think that he doesn't appear, and all of a sudden you hear him like being like like choking on, and then you see Tony Todd rise up, and he's gutting him, and he's like really viciously attacking this guy, and he starts coughing up his own blood, and then he picks up his body and then tosses it, and then he has inner dialogue, and and he takes his hook and he frees her from the straps. Gets her basically out, and she's
saying that she has nothing left.
Nothing left, and he's your only future, or whatever. He's your only.
Be mine.
Yeah, be mine, because you have really no other choice. And so she escapes. She hears like the other people in the hospital, like the nurses and whatever, coming. So she's like, oh boy. So she gets out. She goes out of the room, out a window. And then it's like a few stories up in the like this. Mind you, this is a few stories up. She crawls along the ledge of the building outside the window and goes into another room, knocks over a nurse unconscious in a room, takes her uniform, and then goes disguised as a nurse out of the hospital back to her apartment where her husband is, to a nightmare.
Yes, and we'll discuss that in part 2.
Yes.
So yeah, like and follow for more. Part 2 is coming right up.
Yes. Stay tuned. Follow for more.
Stay tuned.